Evolution at Work Hardcore 2.0, episode 181 is coming your way. Today we're talking about maintenance dosing versus blast and cruise by Para Pharma. And look, in this one, we see a lot of guys. I read a lot of stuff on the internet, and it's not just our forums or our family of forums, but it's all over the place. And people just don't understand what maintenance dosing is, what the risks are, how to do it. They don't understand what blast and cruise is, what the risks are, how to do it. So this one we're going to try to kind of clear it up a little bit. And hopefully you can get a lot out of this episode. We're going to talk about what is blast and cruise exactly, what does maintenance dosing even mean. We're talking about how to blast and cruise if you do go that direction with Para Pharma products. And we're going to talk about how to do a maintenance dose on Para Pharma products as well. So we're going to go over some of their different options. But first, let me remind everyone we are on Apple, we're on Spotify. We get this podcast out a lot. We've been having a lot of views on this podcast, but we want to grow the podcast more. We want to reach more ears on this podcast so we can help as many people as we can. And the problem is the algorithms hate our podcast because of the stuff we talk about. So obviously, platforms don't like this type of things that we talk about. We talk a lot about underground things, and we talk about hardcore things that other bodybuilding podcasts are too chicken shit to talk about. So we do things that they don't do. With that comes a responsibility as a viewer to go ahead and smash the like button, follow us, subscribe, tell your friends and family, leave us reviews, all that good stuff, comment, and that helps drive the algorithms to us because it's hard for us to get the algorithms and helps us grow the channel so we can keep this going. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to keep it going. So let's get right into it. What is blast and cruise? So I'll talk about it really quick and I'll let a monster pretty quick on this one. But look, blast and cruise, I can remember when I first started going on bodybuilding forums, a lot of people didn't do blast and cruise. Then it started to get really popular as people started to talk about it, and people just started giving up on running PCTs. So what they would start doing is just staying on year round. They're like, I'm sick of coming, using steroids, then coming off, and using steroids and coming off. The roller coaster, my libido crashes, I lose gains, I lose strength. I just want to stay on year round. So blast and cruise can refer to simply, most of the time, I think, is you're basically blasting means you're running a high amount of exogenous hormones, and then cruising would revert back to a baseline amount of hormones in the body. And then you would kind of go and cruise for a certain amount of weeks. Then you would blast for a certain amount of weeks. Then you go back to your cruising dose for a certain amount of weeks. Then you blast for a certain amount of weeks. And this is something you cycle throughout the year. So you're never actually coming off these exogenous hormones. So they're always in your system. And a lot of people have started doing this. Professional bodybuilders, I mean, they'll cruise on an insane amount of steroids year round, 500 milligrams, 1,000 milligrams or more, and then they'll blast 2, 3, 4, 5 grams of gear or more. So that's kind of my definition of what blast and cruise is. Mobster, what are your thoughts?
I tell you what it is sometimes, Steve, and I completely get it in terms of if you're using relatively high dosages and then you come off, the difference between how you feel, your hormonal boost can make some people feel absolutely like sort of young again or Superman. And the idea that you don't get to feel like that, your libido goes back to quote unquote normal levels is a massive head fuck. And I mean, there's literally the argument about the phrase hormonal roller coaster applying. The issue for me sometimes, and the reason why I'm not a fan of either blasting and cruising, or for that matter, as it's sometimes used, the phrase maintenance dosing, is because both of those suggest that there's some sort of incredible difficulty holding on to decent amounts of muscle tissue. And as you and I have discussed on previous shows, I've said that for me, this idea that somehow and I've seen this phrase used, I'm going to lose all my gains, it just isn't true. And it's not true for two reasons. Number one, no one keeps all their gains. If you put on an absolutely amazing £10 on cycle, I would not expect you to keep all £10, whether you're maintenance, cruising, whatever. It's just unlikely. And it mostly comes down to stimulus. So let's take, for example, the £10, Steve. I would expect to try to retain at least half, if not slightly more than half. And I've quite often said £5, £6 of a £10 gain would be fantastic. We know it is. If you gain £5 or £6, £3 or £4 retained would be fantastic. That's just reality. And it can be, again, a little bit of a head fuck to deal with the fact that you're going to lose £2 or £3 of your £6 or £7 gained or whatever. But for me, most of the reason why the gains are lost is come down to reverting to the similar calorific and protein and macro intake that you had before and expecting your body to hold on to the new tissue. You need to adjust, even if it's only a little bit. And secondly, even if you have to ease back on some of the loads that you've been using in the gym, some of the volume you've been doing in the gym, you still need to do something that's there to support the new tissue over and above what you had before. And in simple terms, if you went from £200 to £210 on your bench press, just as an example, went, I don't know, from £180 to £200, I would try as best I possibly can when I came off cycle or in between cycles, and I'm even allowing for TRT, I would try to be benching 185, 190, because I know that I'm not going to bench £200 because I'm not on cycle. But equally, I cannot expect my body to hold on to the ability to bench £200 if I go back to benching £180. That doesn't make any sense. So for me, it's one of those phrases where, as we're going to do on the show today, we're going to try and explain what it is as best as possible, the thinking, perhaps the misuse of the term, and I'll clarify that point as well, and realistically, the concepts as that perhaps they can be done and can be applied versus perhaps, and it's what Steve said when he said about blasting and cruising. In a pre-show, I said to Steve, I see a lot of people using health phase. I says, and I suspect what it is that we sometimes, and you and I have probably been guilty of this, Steve, we pick up on phrases that we see used, we don't necessarily fully understand what they are, and then we start to use them, and this is not just in bodybuilding, this is life, as a reflection of the language that's being used around us, and it makes us sound like we know what other people are talking about. When it comes to using steroids, using drugs, the science of training, the science of nutrition, it can be very, very easy to think we've got a handle on it, and perhaps we're confusing it. And you and I have talked about, just as an example of this, the bro science approach that we sometimes get when we're talking to our buddies down the gym, and even the logic that we will sometimes use to support something that we specifically ourselves doing, and we give this kind of advice to someone else, and it might not necessarily suit them, but it sounds like it makes sense. It sounds kind of scientific. It sounds like something that we should be doing. And just as an example, to finish on the support process, etc., and including the whole keeping your gains and so on and so forth. I've used this analogy before. In fact, there's two analogies. The one specific one that applies here is that if it was a necessity over and above anything else, then you would have to question how anybody ever held onto muscle back in the day. I'm talking about, let's say, the drug use of bodybuilding from the 1960s onwards in any meaningful manner, how anybody, with or without drugs, ever held onto muscle, with or without steroids, anabolic steroids especially, Steve, ever held onto any muscle tissue gained from training a certain way for a part of the year to get bigger, and how they, if the thought concept had any weight, how they would arguably lose all their muscle or all of the muscle that they gain in between training cycles, in between PED use. And that's obviously not the case. And I would argue again, perhaps, and this is applied less to the genetic freaks and all those people that are going to go down a really high dosage route, but to, again, the typical listener of this show, you haven't gained 25 or 30 pounds of muscle, because that's unlikely. You're not going to lose 20 pounds over 30 pounds gain if you come off cycle. And again, it's perhaps more about the concept, the thought process of losing some muscle and perhaps arguably that almost dysmorphic thing, Steve, where we kind of like, we love how we look, we like how strong we are. And that might be very, very hard to get to get sort of let go of. And just as an example, and you and I have used this as well, when we talked about people that have returned to training or whatever else, we say muscle memory is a thing. The ability to gain back muscle you've lost is very easy. So it's not. It's kind of one of those struggling to put on muscle, how hard it is to train hard in the gym, how hard it is to keep a good clean diet, and you're kind of almost relying, perhaps arguably too much, on the suggestion of using more drugs or staying on drugs longer as almost a crutch to allow yourself to do other particular things, but not perhaps accepting. You almost have to understand just how hard it can be, and I kind of get it that you don't want that. You don't want to lose stuff that you've lost, but again, you will. No one linearly keeps the amount of muscle they gain or the strength that they gain. If I was doing that, Steve, if you were doing that, when you and I'd use you as an example, Steve, when you had your absolute best bench press before ruining your shoulder, if you was keeping everything that you got, you'd still be benching 400 plus pounds. If I was able to do certain particular things that I'd done back in the day, I would still be doing those things. Am I at my all-time highest body weight? No. Is Steve as big as he's ever been? No, because there's an element of us going in different directions and choosing different paths. So, guys, it's something perhaps you need to get your heads around, but also, arguably, as we're going to do with this show, get into the actual concept, the necessity or lack thereof, and if it's a necessity, again, I want to finish on this particular point, Steve. If you choose to do these things, we're going to offer you suggestions as to how you can do these things, but we're not necessarily saying that you actually need to do them. So it's going to be the best option if it's a decision you make. It is, after all, your body. It's you going to the gym. It's you with your particular target. So we're going to try and help you in that particular regard, but at the same time, get your head around the fact that you're going to lose a little bit of strength. You can always train to be stronger again. This is part of life, going through the gym forever and ever. I'm in. Same thing with regards to gaining muscle tissue and so on and so forth. So yeah, we understand that there's a little bit of a head fuck here, but at the same time, guys, we know that some of you are going to do it. So we're going to try and help you as best we can with some suggestions using Para Pharma products as to how you could do it, but also argue, is it something you need to do? Or perhaps could you think, for example, Steve, how important for young people listening to this podcast and being as big and as muscular as possible. And in 5 or 10 years down the road, as we've discussed on other shows with regards to fertility, other things become more important. So, look long term as well. Think about this as a whole concept, guys. And please come onto the forums and check out where we discuss these ideas as well.
I'll add that you're not going to improve in a linear way. And until you accept that, you're just going to drive yourself crazy. And a lot of you suffer from bigorexia. A lot of these bodybuilders who have died, we've seen, I mean, while they were alive, we could tell they had bigorexia. They just wanted to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Rich Piana, I'll use him as an example, as I do many times. He could not accept losing a millimeter off his bicep. He couldn't accept it. He'd be embarrassed. He would be, embarrassed to lose a millimeter. So he had to just stay on blast and cruise, blast and cruise, blast and cruise year round. He could never come off because if he came off, he'd be scared. Oh my God, I'm losing a millimeter off my bicep. I'm going to freak out. Well, it just doesn't work like that. The body can't accept that. So I'm gonna go over a couple risks that you have to be aware of when you do blast and cruise. And there's two main issues that are going to occur. The first one has to do with your HPTA, and the second one has to do with organ damage. So let me talk about the HPTA first. So when you blast and cruise for a set amount of time, whether it be 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, you're damaging your reproductive system. You're damaging your pituitary glands. You're damaging your Leydig cells. And what happens is if your pituitary glands get damaged, then they're not going to produce hormones. And if your Leydig cells get damaged, then they're not going to function. You're not going to produce sperm. You're not going to produce testosterone. You're not going to produce the hormones because it's not going to be fed anymore. So you're going to damage, your entire HPTA is going to be damaged. You end up getting a fertility test down the line, you'll have no sperm or very, very little sperm. And if you get your testosterone levels checked, you'll have the testosterone levels of an 80-year-old man. And you're going to wonder what the hell happened here. Well, what happened was you caused damage to your HPTA. That's the one constant with anabolic steroids that will occur. And it's going to be one of those situations where you will have to go on TRT the rest of your life. You're just going to have to pin yourself like a pincushion every week for the rest of your life, okay? Because you damage your HPTA. And you can damage your HPTA at a really young age. Um, I used to do this podcast with Coach Trevor back in the day. He started using steroids at 18 years old because he listened to the wrong person and he was blasting and cruising. And then by the time he got in his 20s, he wasn't producing testosterone anymore. He had the testosterone levels of a woman. And then he had to go on TRT for the rest of his life, starting at 21 years old. That sucks. So you want to keep that in mind. If you do choose to blast and cruise, you can damage your pituitary glands and Leydig cells permanently by doing that. Number two is the organ risks. And I'll let you and Mobster also talk about this. But your kidneys take a beating when you use anabolic steroids. Just think of a sponge. You put a sponge in a bucket of water and you pull the sponge out and you squeeze the sponge and the water comes out. Your kidneys are kind of like a sponge. And we need our kidneys to filter out all that crap out of our body. And if you no longer have the ability to do that, then you're going to have to go on dialysis. We see a lot of bodybuilders, once they get your age, Mobster, they got to go to dialysis because they started abusing steroids at a really young age. They started damaging their kidneys at a really young age. They did a lot of blast and cruise. They stayed on year round. And now their kidneys don't function good enough or don't function at all. So now they need to hook themselves up to a machine for hours, two, three, four times a week, whatever, and it's expensive and it's time consuming and it sucks. And we've seen that happen. And a lot of people say, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. This is not a life. I could be on vacation. Like they can't take a
Yeah,
vacation because
yeah.
they have to. You know what I'm saying? It sucks. It really, really sucks to go through that. Your liver takes a beating because these steroids, even if you're taking injectables, are still going to be liver toxic to some degree, some more than others. Your heart takes a beating. You're thickening your blood. So if your arteries start getting clogged up, as they do because of all the food that we consume, and over time, your arteries get more and more clogged up. So think about it. If your arteries are clogged up and your blood is thickening at the same time, then now
Yeah.
you're opening yourself up for problems with like blood clots and other problems. So there's all kinds of things that happen. Brain
Yes.
damage. We know that there's brain damage from
Yeah.
using anabolic steroids. There's prostate damage from using anabolic steroids. These are all risks. And the more you stay on, the more that accumulates. So if you're cycling steroids on and off, and you're
Yeah.
taking lots of time off from steroids, then you'll be fine. You can do this long
Here's the
term.
thing. Here's the thing, Steve. I think it's very easy for most of our listeners to conceptualize the idea of abusing alcohol, and we know that cirrhosis of the liver, for example, is something that comes from people that drink, and they don't even have to drink a lot. So just drink every single motherfucking day, 3 or 4 beers every day, a few shots every single day, and at some point in their life, they're going to end up with issues as regards alcohol. We know, for example, that there are side effects from over the counter and prescribed medication, and we conceptualize that quite easily. Most other listeners, either if they're not obese and trying to lose weight, they would still understand the idea of eating badly and being out of shape. Right? And the argument against is kind of the other way, that you and I could go and take some Advil, ibuprofen. We could go to the supermarket, we could go to the gas station, we could go to the pharmacy, and we can buy an over the counter medication like Advil. We can throw the whole goddamn bottle down the back of our necks, and we could make ourselves really kind of pretty goddamn uncomfortable. It might not kill us, but we'd give our stomach an absolute battering. We would not feel good. And the argument then goes, you and I could then also go out and take 10 mils for 5,000 milligrams of testosterone on a high on for 4,000 milligrams of say test 400 and inject the whole goddamn vial into our quads, into our arse, into a body part, and we probably wouldn't feel that bad. I think the issue here is that, and I refer to the alcohol suggestion, it's one of those long-term things. We can absolutely do. We wouldn't die from injecting. It might be bloody uncomfortable, but we wouldn't die, and we probably wouldn't get fucked up injecting a whole vial of testosterone in one hit. But it's the long-term impact. It's asking your body to process something that it's not really comfortable with processing long term. And I think what's really difficult sometimes for our younger listeners is to conceptualize your thought processes and your physicality, even what's required of you in life as a younger person versus an older person. And I say that as an older person. Steve's, I think you're around 40 years of age. I'm 60 years of age. So it's a lot easier for us to say, guys, and I've done this on shows, what you do now, and I did say this earlier, is your choice. But we know, and we have seen threads on the forum with regards to this, and I'll discuss one in a moment when we're talking about maintenance dosing. We know that you will kind of understand the future issues of facility. You kind of understand that perhaps there might be a problem, but you almost, to put it crudely, put your head in the sand for now, and then your head will come out of the sand and you will face the reality, good or bad, of a decision made. Right. So let me address, Steve, the reason why we've done this particular show. And most of our recent shows have been inspired by threads we've seen on the forum. And this particular one is thus. He's a 34-year-old male, Steve. So just coming up to that point where your testosterone is going to drop off slowly and naturally. 245 pounds body weight, doesn't say how tall he is, 15% body fat. So that's a little bit up there. His name's Rajappa, and the thread is Blast Cruise TRT advice. Now, he's asking for advice, guys, so this is the stuff that we like. He says, week 11 of a test 500, trend 100, I'm assuming those two are weekly, with 50 milligrams VAR. I'm going to assume that is, it says 6 weeks, so I think 6 weeks of 11 weeks, and I'm going to assume that was daily. I know I'm reaching a limit on how long it's generally advisable to run these compounds. He's right. We would probably say about week 12 for this, Steve. I've made great strength gains and dropped quite a bit of fat, but I feel I'm just starting to near my goals. So he's seeing some success, and I touched upon this earlier, especially in regards to getting lean for the summer. He goes on. Let me read the question, Steve. Would it make sense to remain on a maintenance dose of testosterone? He doesn't say what he thinks that is. While I continue focusing on fat loss, if I hope to introduce some other compounds in the near future, as opposed to cycling off. So he's never done blasting and cruising, and now he's kind of suggesting that's exactly what he's going to do. He talks about maintenance dosing. What is the optimal amount of time I should be giving my body a rest from other compounds, except the maintenance dose test, before considering starting something else? We'll address these questions as we go along. While on this cycle, or on a maintenance dose of test, which indicators on blood work will tell me it's best to cycle off completely, do TRT, or introduce other compounds. We could have a bit of fun with that one, I think. And generally speaking, this is a question. This is exactly what he said. How much more destructive to the reproductive system would a blast and cruise cycle like this be than cycling off and back on a few months? I would like to maintain fertility. And then his last one here, Steve, is any other general tips for hyper-focusing on getting down body fat while maintaining gains? Where do we start with this one, Steve? I mean, you've already touched upon the potential issue of fertility as he's coming up to, I would argue, week 12, because that's probably where we would suggest a cycle would go, to then stay on maintenance dose. And I'm going to suggest that's probably going to be above sports TRT, so over 400 milligrams a week. And then at the same time, he's worried about maintaining fertility. Well, quite simply, the longer you're on, the more of an impact you're going to have on your fertility. So that's an absolute given. It says indicators on blood work, which will tell me it's best to cycle off completely. So talking about maintenance dosing, one assumes to maintain, and we'll discuss that momentarily, versus coming off doing TRT or even introducing other compounds. And this is where I think there's a confusion. So let's start with the maintenance dosing. What do you think? And I know you've used this term yourself, as I said to you in the pre-show, with regards to your GLP product use. What do you think maintenance dosing is? And then I'm going to say what I think he means here versus what perhaps is a better idea.
Yeah, I think maintenance dose would be when it comes to testosterone, for example, let's say you did a 12-week cycle, 500 milligrams a week, and then you ran maybe a couple other steroids with it, just like this guy did. And then maintenance dose would be just dropping it down to like a regular TRT dose or something above that. So I'm going to do, so let's say a TRT dose would be 100 or 125 milligrams a week. A maintenance dose to me would be something like 150 or 200. So it's very similar to blast and cruise, but it's a lot more mild. So because on a blast and cruise, a lot of people will go even more aggressive than that. Like they'll literally cruise on 500 milligrams of test a week for
There's an argument, Steve, for sorry to interrupt, but the cruising could be more than one PED, whereas here I think he's suggesting just testosterone. So that might be a difference between blasting and cruising and maintenance. Maintenance will probably be just, as Steve suggests, a higher dose of testosterone, more than TRT does, because he talks about that as well, versus cruising, which might be more than one product, might be more than one drug.
Yeah, that's a good point too. So at the end of the day, it can mean a lot of things, but I think it probably means something closer to TRT than what would be in a normal blast and cruise situation. Because what happens a lot with people who blast and cruise, I'll use Rich Piana as an example. Let's say Rich Piana runs 3,000 milligrams of gear a week to really grow, get stronger, and get those pumps that he liked in the gym, and then he's not going to drop it down to 100 milligrams when he cruises. He's going to drop it down to 500 milligrams or even 750 milligrams or even 1,000 milligrams when he cruises. You see what I'm saying? Because if he drops it to 100 milligrams, that's like not even being on anything to him. So I think that's probably, a maintenance dose would be something a lot more mild. Like you're getting closer to, that 100 milligram TRT level. So that's what I think maintenance dosing is. So, you want to get into like some of the risk of doing that?
Yeah, I mean the fertility thing, because he's talking about blood tests as well, and what to look out for in a blood test. I think the obvious thing is, Steve, if he stays on and he waits to indicators in his blood test, then we absolutely know he's going to affect his fertility. He's not getting his sperm count done because it's kind of almost an argument to be made as to what's the point while you're on. I mean, the key phrase here is suppression. And whether it's a mild amount of suppression or horrible amount of suppression, vis-a-vis, for example, using SARMs versus anabolic steroids, it's still fucking suppression. And suppression, in simple terms, is that you are lowering or suppressing, sometimes down to zero, your ability to produce healthy, viable swimmers in your seminal fluid, i.e., the sperm that will go and fertilize an egg at some point, if that's what you want. And we have seen literally people that have gone and had their sperm counts done come back with zero or one or in the hundreds, as opposed to, I think one was a million when it should have been 100 million. And they were very, very, very lucky. It took them 12 months or something to get their fertility up. And of course, we've said on shows and on the forums, it only takes one healthy sperm. But considering it against this idea, we create Superman with the drugs, but we somehow imagine an endocrine system, our ability to reproduce sperm is comparable to where it was pre-cycle if we come off cycle and we follow some of the fertility protocols suggested by people like Dave Palumbo, etc. And as I said on one reply on the forum, Steve, Dave and the other people that talk about these protocols will only ever tell you about the times they're successful. The times when they're not successful, people don't come back on and talk about it. It fucked up. I failed. I made a mess of it. We had one person on the forum specifically say that he'd actually made his wife cry, his partner cry, a wife, I think it was, cry because of decisions that he'd made, and they're going to have to spend the next 1 to 2 years doing what the hell they could to recover. I quoted the local IFBB pro and talked to his wife in the gym the other day about the in vitro fertilization, and he was very lucky that he'd actually had his sperm frozen pre-competing at the Mystery Olympia and so on and so forth. So he knew the effects and even the old IVF thing and how difficult it is. And I suspect it's kind of, I would want to be careful using, if I was a member of the forums, I'd want to be careful using phrase like maintenance dosing without being clear what that actually is. Because blasting, cruising, TRT, and so on, we've even done a whole show where we said the different kinds of TRT and the difference between medically prescribed by a clinical or endocrine endocrinologist, a hospital, etc., versus what I run for TRT versus what other people would run for TRT versus sports TRT versus what arguably a maintenance dose and so on and so forth was so wide of variation that you need to be clear what you mean when you say the phrase maintenance dosing. So we try to clarify for it listening to the show, but you need to be clear if you decide that this is something what you're going to do, just how much that is, and you need to be 100% clear just precisely the effects on your body. Steve's talked about the physical stress on your organs, up to and including your brain, of staying on. I've talked about the comparison with alcohol, the comparison with recreational drugs, the comparison with prescribed and over-the-counter medications, and how it's easier for us to think of those things as damaging but not steroids, and how we might bounce back. To take it to the extreme, Steve, it'd be kind of like doing heroin, getting absolutely completely mashed off your tits. You've won the lottery, you can do what you like. And being okay with the idea of being high as fuck for 6 months, but hoping at the end of the 6 months that you won't be a long-time drug addict and the heroin won't sort of ruin your life forever, ever, amen. And people would turn around and say, don't be fucking stupid, mobster. We go, okay, you're okay with the concepts of the addictive medications, but and the damage to your body, but you're the non-addictive, vis-a-vis for the most part steroids, and still having some impact. So yeah, be clear on what you mean, guys, if you decide to maintain. So we're going to probably suggest, and I think I kind of agree with Steve, if we get into the maintenance stuff, it's going to probably be higher than perhaps what you would normally run, even the low end of what TRT is. Medically prescribed 90 to 120 milligrams a week or the equivalent thereof. I run 200 milligrams. I wouldn't see, I think, in my mind, an additional benefit of pushing to 300. And again, the long-term effects of me using even 200 arguably, but certainly 300 milligrams a week is going to be over and above any benefit I get from running testosterone therapy, and probably push me towards potential health issues. So for me, maintenance dose and Steve is going to be, like you said, somewhere between 200 and sports TRT, 400 milligrams. How long are you maintaining for? This guy is looking at a 12-week cycle ultimately. Is it 20 weeks? Is it 30 weeks? The longer you're on, at the higher dose, the greater the risk. You must understand this. And then once you understand it, you can make the choices that you're going to make. So do we want to talk about this anymore, Steve? Perhaps, for example, markers that you can look out for, or do we want to talk
Yeah, and then we talk about the
things?
markers. Very,
Yeah.
very important to track your blood work if you're going to do this. And we're going to talk about on the next couple segments some Para Pharma ideas. And at the end of the day, you got to get the blood work done. And you got to be on top of it. Don't think, well, I've been doing this for 6 months. I've been doing this for a year. Everything looks good. I'm just going to keep doing it and nothing bad can happen. So it's very important to get your blood work done. It's very important to get your blood pressure checked accurately multiple times a day. That gives you a better idea of your blood pressure than just doing one reading a day, because your blood pressure does fluctuate throughout the day, obviously. If you have a high stress job, it's going to fluctuate while you're working. So it's good to just get your blood pressure taken in the morning. You go to the bathroom, you're relaxed. As soon as you wake up, before you eat your first meal, and then get your blood pressure taken. Then this way you have a more accurate number that way. So you start noticing your blood pressure is looking strong, look, that's an indicator that you really need to adjust your maintenance dose. So if you're doing 400, 300, what are you doing blast and cruise? If you're cruising, you may want to back off a little bit. So you got to be flexible if you're going to do this to stay healthy. The heart health is the big thing because that's the number one killer in North America, Mobster, is heart health. And that's something that most people have an issue with, especially we're seeing, especially as you get older, but we're seeing more younger and younger people having heart issues. And it's something that's very, very plausible that you can end up hurting yourself and damaging your heart permanently. So I think it's very important to make sure that you're getting the blood work done as often as possible and you're getting your lipids checked. You check on your cholesterol and all that stuff. A lot of people who do the blast and cruise thing on our forum, they also are using blood pressure medications and they're using other medications to help with their blood pressure and cholesterol and all that stuff. And a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah,
guys
yeah.
also are doing, I wouldn't say a lot of guys, I say almost everybody is running their support supplements on cycle. So you can come on the
Yeah.
forum and
I mean,
find out.
just for myself, Steve, is a daily aspirin and a daily half Cialis in there, and my blood pressure's always been pretty good. But again, I want nice thin blood. I don't want blood pressure issues. And Steve's absolutely correct in regards to organ protection type products as well. That would be an absolute must. It's the longer you run, the more essential that would be, Steve.
All right, so we can let's dip our toes a little bit. And let's start with blast and cruise. How to blast on cruise on Para Pharma products. So let's give you some ideas. So first of all, if you're going to blast and cruise, 95 or 99% of the time, testosterone is going to be an essential part of that because testosterone is a good way to make sure that you're cruising and you're getting those androgens, you're getting that estrogen effect where it's getting into your body, leaving your body at the same time. So a lot of you are going to target testosterone. Testosterone cypionate, testosterone enanthate, they're the top two sellers, the top two most popular steroid options overall, and they're definitely the most popular when it comes to blasting and cruising. So you want a good testosterone, Parapharma has it. So I would suggest if you're gonna do blast and cruise to go with the testosterone cypionate. Why? Now, why testosterone cyp over testosterone E? Everyone's gonna say, "Oh, Steve, they're the same thing. They're the same thing." Testosterone cyp has a longer half life by about 2 or 3 days, and so that would mean that you only have to pin it once a week, once every 10 days. Some people pin it every 2 weeks. And you'll be perfectly fine doing it that way because it has a long ester. So you can cruise, for months before you start your blast and just cruise on some of that parapharma testosterone. And look, at the end of the day, how much should I cruise with? It can range from anywhere from 100 to 200 milligrams. Some people go 300 milligrams. Some people go higher, 500 up to 1,000 milligrams. Um, I don't know, Mobster. What is the most cruising dose that you've seen from some of the craziest dudes over the years that have been?
I have
Has it been more than 1,000? Because
I have seen 1,000 mentioned as one or two people's
yeah,
cruises. I would agree with Steve. I'll use myself as an example. I'll pretend to be a guinea pig here. If I run as I do, and I'm looking at Para Pharma's Testo 250, Testo Cypionate 250 here, Steve. If I run TRT dose, which is what I do, of testosterone cypionate, 200 milligrams a week, that's my TRT. Let's decide that I'm going to put myself in a guinea pig shoes and I'm going to blast and cruise. What would I do? Then I would argue that my blast would be 600 or 700 milligrams, and it's probably going to be a stack, whether that's Sustanon, Deca, whether that's orals in the form of Anavar, and so on and so forth. Again, all of these available from Para Pharma. If I cruised, it's going to be higher than my TRT dose. My TRT dose, remember, is 200 milligrams. So I think I'm going to cruise this the somewhere between 300 and 400 milligrams. And again, I'm going to push my health markers. I'm going to push my lipids and push my cholesterol. But again, I'm TRT at this point. TRT, from my point, 60 years of age, 200 milligrams is for life. So I'm only going to back off down that thing. Blasting and cruising to me is something almost of a younger man's thing. So again, I would agree with Steve. They've even got a testosterone in AMP 400 milligrams, but I would probably only run that at 200 milligrams as a TRT thing. So it's a dosage thing more than anything else. But yeah, I've seen cruises, as Steve said, pegged at 1,000 milligrams. The great and vast majority of people are somewhere between 400 and 500 milligrams, Steve. But for me, the upper limit, I think, for me, cruising would have to be 400 milligrams in my mind. It's above a TRD dose. It's definitely the higher end. It's beginning to get into sports TRT. And it's single product. There would be nothing else on the table. Would it just be the cypionate? What I would run on the blast, and I'll bring Steve back in for this, is something else. So you're still on you're still on the 300, 400 milligrams of testosterone cypionate, Steve. What are you going to blast with?
So there's a couple different ways you can blast. You can either keep your testosterone dose at your cruising dose, which is what a lot of people like to do, and then you could start adding more steroids. Or you can add more steroids and increase your testosterone dose. It just depends on the individual. Some people like higher testosterone and some people don't. You can come on the forum and look at the laws. I saw a guy the other day, he's running, I think, 1,200 milligrams of testosterone right now during his blast. And, that is a lot. I mean, for me, 750 is the most I've ever run a week as part of a cycle, and I didn't notice any difference between 750 and 500 except more side effects. So for me it didn't make any sense, but for him he really likes it. Some people react well to it. So that would be a decision for you to kind of experiment with. But if you do that, make sure you pick up Para Pharma aromatase inhibitors. And they have Arimidex and they have Aromacin, which are really, really good options. So
I think the
Parapharm.
key thing to look here for, Steve, and quite often when blasting and cruising is discussed, normally what happens is a person comes onto the forums or anywhere, Steve, and says, this is what I would like to do. I want to get cut. I want to get more muscular. I want to get stronger. So the key thing to look at for when we're talking about stuff cycles is, what are you blasting for? It isn't, I would agree with Steve. If I got on very well with testosterone in AMP and I was running that as my TRT, then the idea of going to 600, 700, 800, or even 1,000 milligrams and getting the same great response but magnified by 2 or 3 times would be fantastic. But it would depend on what I'm blasting for. Am I upping the dose by the blast with a specific aim in mind? And in my case, as Steve just suggested, it would be a bulk. Can I get as big as I possibly can? I've discussed on multiple shows my favorite bulk. So let's keep that testosterone cypionate, in my example, at the 200 milligrams that I like. I've discussed the idea of taking it up to 400 milligrams, Steve, for a cruise. So I would probably actually drop it down a little bit, but I would introduce my favorite bulkers, which would be Para Pharma Sustanon and Para Pharma Deca, because I know that my body responds, or used to respond, incredibly well to those two particular products. So, I mean, because of the half-life of cypionate, it's almost pointless. I'd have to almost go with that for some weeks to clear out the cypionate in order to introduce the Sustanon and Deca. And then, of course, some of the esters of Sustanon are quite long, so it's reducing down, keeping it there at a level that I can drop back to when I come off cycle, and having the Sustanon and Deca in there. For me, Steve, 8 to 12 weeks. 12 weeks, I think I'd done one cycle back in the day that I wasn't very happy about. 16 weeks. 12 weeks is a sweet spot for most people. 8 to 12 weeks is about where I want to be. And I was doing it around competitions. What about, Steve, if we were cruising and you can pick a dose, but you decided you wanted to cut? How would you
Yeah.
change your
So
cruise
how would you
dosage?
do before I jump in? How would
Oh,
you do
yeah, sorry.
Deca and Sustanon?
All right. So, again, I have experimented with higher dosages, but for me, grand total of under now at this point in my life, 1,000 milligrams. My best results were always between 700 and 800 milligrams total. And I believe I run the Sustanon ever so slightly higher, which works for me in terms of ratios than a Deca. So you're looking, for example, let's say it was 800 milligrams, Steve. I think you'd be looking at 450 milligrams of sus and 350 milligrams of deca, or there or thereabouts for me. But again, you come onto the forums and ask us what works for you, where what your experience is, and so on and so forth, and then we can come up with suggested doses for your particular target. So yeah, what about cutting using the cruise dose and then going into a cut, Steve?
Yeah, so for recomposition, or if you want to do a blast cutter, and I would, if you have low body fat, I would be all over Winstrol and I'd be all over Masteron because they're both really, really good if you're already lean. So Masteron would be a great option for hardening, and then Winstrol would be a great option for drying out and really looking ripped in the vascularity. I mean, we see people on Winstrol, they get so ripped and vascular that they have veins popping out of their abs. And that's when you get veins popping out of your abs, you know you're super lean. That's a situation where you're super lean. So Para Pharma has you covered because they have so many different options. They have the Masteron Probe, they have the Masteron Enanthate. I would obviously go with the Enanthate. You're blasting and cruising anyway. You might as well go with long esters. This saves you from having to inject often, right? And then the Winstrol, they have the tabs and they have the injectable as well, and you can drink it as well. So they have the different options on both. So this depends on what you're comfortable doing. And that would be a really good option. Now, another injectable for those of you who want to do something a little more mild for a blast, even though it's a blast, is Primo. We've seen a lot of guys in Australia who really love blasting lots of Primo, and their logic for doing really, really high amounts of Primo. I've seen guys go over 1,000 on the Primo a week. And their logic is, well, I can run that much of Primo. It gives me the results I'm looking for, but it also keeps my side effects low. So that would be a great strategy for those of you who want to do it a more safe blasting cruise. Go with something like Primo that doesn't have a lot of side effects.
I'll use as an example just to clarify the more extreme examples. And we've discussed former WABA professional Monstro, aka Marco Louis, and talking about high dosaging, and even I believe what he was calling the TRT dose was circa 1,000 milligrams. So that was one of the places we probably saw that number bandied about. And we will point out, obviously, that Marco passed away at 40 odd 1 years of age, I believe, Steve. So keep that in mind. He was a great professional and an amazing physique from day one, from teenager, almost right up to the end. But his blast, which would be competition cycles or occasionally for exhibition work, where he did incredibly well and was a true professional, it has to be said, when it comes to exhibition work, was in the area of 6,000 milligrams plus growth hormone, plus peptides, plus insulin, and plus a bunch of other things. So that we and something else as well, Steve. It occurred to me when we were talking about blasting and cruising earlier on. Steve knows that I'm a fan of the history of bodybuilding, physical culture, call it what you will, which covers everything, weightlifting and so on, and also access to the internet. And something that happened when blasting and cruising kind of came along, and people started to stay on longer and started to stay on higher dosages, was that we started to see and continue to see the stories that came out. When I first came into the sport, Steve, the suggestion specifically with orals, which we haven't really discussed, but we'll get into that in a second, was that liver damage, kidney damage was a thing, but it was kind of rare, might even be reported in the newspapers. The idea that bodybuilder dies, kidney damage is in the newspapers now as a headline is silly. It wouldn't happen. But we do see it on the bodybuilding news, and we started to see a lot more women as well as men that were using excessive dosages, much more easily reported, way more available to just normal people to go into the gym via social media, via YouTube, etc., and seeing news type channels reporting on. I think 1 year was quoted on one channel that they had 40 people that had competed worldwide that had made a name for themselves. That was quote unquote famous bodybuilders. Not everybody was a top level professional, but some were. And Steve and I have actually done shows when we discussed the sheer volume of, I'm thinking of one particular show, Steve, we did on a black bodybuilder whose name escapes me, and the steroids that were in the autopsy blood test, saying just how much of, I think was it Winstrol or EQ, which was in the thousands of milligrams per nanograms per deciliter, and it was a stupidly high number for the amount that he was doing. So yeah, way more chance of these things. Keep that in mind. Blasting and cruising and or maintaining on oral steroids, I would say no, no, and never, never. I wouldn't do it, Steve. What about your thoughts on using orals or blasting, cruising, or
Yeah, let's talk about
maintaining?
maintenance though. So actually one oral that I was gonna suggest is Proviron. And Para Pharma has really, really good Proviron. And Proviron is nice as an oral, and I'll tell you why. Because it's not as liver toxic as others. In fact, it's not 17 alpha alkylated. So it has very, very less minimal effects on your liver. But you can do a little bit of Proviron with the testosterone as a maintenance dose for a longer period of time. Maybe do 10 milligrams, 25 milligrams tops, and then that would give you a lot of benefits.
I
Um,
actually run Proviron on a daily basis, Stephen, have done for since my TRT, plus I'm on cycle right now. So I would agree 100% with
and
Steve.
then
That's
talk
probably
about
the only way to.
the Cialis that Paraform also has. How does that help
Yeah,
you as well? What else are you
yeah.
taking?
So it's worth pointing out, and I actually said this to someone just the other day, when we were talking about the GLP-1 drugs, and both with the erectile dysfunction drugs, the Cialis, Viagra, and so on and so forth, and the GLP-1 drugs, it's what they were formulated for versus what they get used for. So, ironically, the erectile dysfunction benefits of using drugs like Cialis was a side effect, that they were actually looking for ways to treat blood pressure issues, specifically high blood pressure issues, Steve, with the dilation of blood vessels using these particular medications. And what the feedback that they were getting with the patients in the studies and the tests and so on and so forth, the medical stuff, they were checking the blood pressure, they were doing blood tests, it seemed to be working fine. But the feedback was it's improved my erection, doctors, last night. Da, 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 da. So, of course, what ended up happening was that these drugs do treat blood pressure, although there are probably arguably better options. But the sales for them, as we like to put it, dick drugs, went through the fucking roof. So, Cialis, you've got two ways of using Cialis, and again, Para Pharma products. One is for some people, and it works better when you are lean, hydrated, and you've got a little bit of carbs in your system. People love to take a half dose of Cialis almost as a pre-workout. I would argue it doesn't boost your ability to train in the gym. What it does do for some people conditioned is give you a mega pump. You get the veins in your dick go to the veins in your arms, the veins in your chest, the veins in your shoulders. If you're lean and you're doing the volume and you're hydrated, you can have a fantastic fucking pump. Doesn't work for everybody, Steve. You've got to be in condition. No good being a fat motherfucker and hoping for the best. The other issue, of course, as I said already, for me, which would be the case, half a Cialis every single day as a blood pressure medication. I weigh in excess of 300 pounds. I lift heavy fucking weights. I'm an old motherfucker. So I want to have my heart working well. I do my steps every day, 10,000 yesterday, Steve. I try to, but not always eat as clean as possible. I'm lifting stupidly heavy poundages from time to time, which could fuck me up in terms of my blood pressure, my heart, and specifically my connective tissues and my joints and so on. So therefore, I make sure on my list of supplements is a half of a dick drug in the form of Cialis to thin my blood out, and the same thing with the 75 milligrams a day of aspirin for the same reason. I have people around me that have had heart attacks that are big, strong motherfuckers, and literally, I think because they had the scare, was said to me, "Make sure you do this, make sure you do that." And I was already doing a couple of things, but the Cialis, arguably the Proviron. Here's the things. So regular would be the 75 milligram single tablet of aspirin every single day, the half of Cialis, which works out, I believe, to be 10 milligrams every single day. And as Steve just said, I also started doing Proviron every single day, especially when I'm on cycle, Steve, because it boosts the cycle, increases the free testosterone as a benefit to your SHBG, but also because I'm on TRT, to get the most out of my TRT, to give me the anabolic edge, if you like. being a big, strong, muscular motherfucker in the gym. So those are the things, and that's without being specific on the actual cycles, etc. But just as an example, Steve, and again, you could get this from Para Pharma. Right now, my cycle is just recently gone from 30 milligrams a day of oral Anavar to 50 milligrams. Literally this week, I'm on week 4 as of this Monday, and that will be 4 to 8 weeks. And 10 milligrams, I believe it is, of LGD, Steve. So that's my current cycle for the listeners as well. But
Very
yeah,
good.
that
Yeah, and it,
not anywhere near a blast, that's for sure, Steve.
so
No
so
thousand
as we
milligrams.
transition to, talking about parapharma, one of the things you talk about, Mobster, is with Cialis and Viagra. And Viagra in America, if you go through a doctor and it's not covered by insurance, you're looking at over $100 a tablet in some situations. So if you're taking this stuff every other day,
$100. What the fuck?
yeah, that's quite a, and people pay it. These rich fucks pay it. So the nice thing about Parapharma is you can come to our website, come to evolutionary.org, check out Parapharma, and see how much their Viagra and Cialis cost. It will be a fraction of that price. Same thing with testosterone. It will be a fraction of what you're going to have to pay going through a clinic or going through a doctor. And that's the good thing about Parapharma is they provide these amazing products where it's affordable. It's not like it used to be. And it used to be only, lawyers and accountants and, these white collar guys, on Wall Street could afford steroids. Now we got guys on the forum with all kinds of jobs, construction jobs. We got roofers, we got electricians, we got people who, are retired who can afford to use these compounds. And it's thanks to brands like Parapharma. And Parapharma has been around for 14 years providing great quality products, and they have 99.9% positive reviews out there. There's always that one Karen or Ken out there that complains, but it's very, very rare. And a lot of times their complaints, we see these complaints sometimes on the forum too. Their complaints are basically just, it's a confusion, it's a misunderstanding, it's something where they don't understand what they're doing and it's their fault. It's
Absolutely,
not
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
But Parapharma is excellent. Look, the prices are great. Their shipping is fast. They're vetted. Their stuff has been tested numerous times. And there's something that they're a brand that Mobster and I both have used and we will continue to use because they're fantastic. So Mobster, talk about Parapharma, your
yeah.
experiences with Parapharma for a couple
Yes,
minutes, and then we'll
you
go to disclaimer.
listeners, you can come onto the forum and do a search, and if you look for Mobster logs, you'll see my main logs. I think the main one on Evolutionary runs to hundreds of pages, but I ran a specific cutting log 4 weeks using Parapharma products, using the RIP 150, I believe it's called, Steve. And if I'm wrong, it'll be there on their products. Oh, something they've even got semaglutide now as well, Steve. And will it be expanded, I'm sure, into other products? I have personal experience from, and I will tell this story again, using Parapharma's RIP product, RIP 150, Tren, testosterone, and I believe Masteron. I'll say that off the top of my head, Steve, 50 milligrams each per mil with 3 injections per week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, might have the weekend off, and did 4 week and recomposition. The suggestion was that I would drop some body fat from that particular point, 327 down to 320, and I recompositioned. I put on some muscle, but my waist stayed smaller. So it absolutely worked for me. And that was a grand total, Steve, of 450 milligrams per week. And I don't think I was on CRT at that point. So that was all I was doing. And I had zero PIP issues, just the slightest issue with the Tren acetate in the product, which would be a grand total of 150 milligrams a week, in terms of me doing additional cardio and being a little tiny bit miserable, tiny sensation of being ever so slightly more toxic. And it was the first time I'd used Tren, so that was literally my first experience in that particular regards. And the only other issue with Steve is not having any treats or cakes or sweets or anything like that. No pop, no nothing, and doing 3 lots of cardio a day and moaning like a bitch about it. But that had nothing to do with Parapharma. So for me, and I know for Steve, Parapharma products are absolutely great. We definitely encourage you to come onto the forums and check it out, because the only issue I think someone was moaning about in the last couple of days, Steve, was how goddamn long it had taken to them. And yet, ironically, one of the resellers of Para Pharma products is probably up there as to be one of the fastest getting products to you I've seen. I think typically less than 5 days.
Yeah, you
And
can't control
absolutely,
customs. Customs,
no, exactly.
it
People
could take
moaning
one
about
day
the
or it could take
post or
yeah.
DHL, it's nothing to do with the company
No,
selling the product
they're
or
shipping
the
it
distributor.
out the
Yeah.
same time. It's just a matter of how long
If
does
it's
it
on a
take,
little
you know?
donkey coming over the mountain, you want the company to prod the donkey's ass. It can't be done. But when you get the products, you see the product's beautiful, it's well packaged, it is exactly what it says it is. We know that we can show you that tests have been done on these products. We can talk about personal positive experiences, and we can say, never mind what Mobster says, never mind what Stevesmi says. Come onto the forums and see other people talking about it. Just as an example, again, Steve, I think you said they do regular. The reseller I'm thinking of does regular monthly deals of that product, so you can absolutely save, stock up. You can think about future blasting by stocking up now, get your stash ready for the blast, and so on. And I would say, yeah, listen, we don't talk about these products too lightly. We're saying that we trust them, we use them, we've had great success with them. So that's 100% reasons why we would talk about them as a great source. Let us know your thoughts on for what you think blasting and cruising is and whether or not you've done it. The same thing with maintaining. Do you think you need to maintain on steroids, or is it training and nutrition related, or as much training and nutrition as I suggest it is? Am I wrong? That's perfectly fine. Come onto the forums and discuss it. Let us know in the comments below. Is it something that perhaps we need to get a head around? It's what people are going to do all the time, Steve. Or is it something that perhaps you need to be thinking about in terms of your health, your facility? So yeah, let us know your thoughts on the subject, guys. We're always going to be interested. And as Steve said earlier on, thumbs up, likes, shares. Let people know about this kind of information being out there. Otherwise, how the hell do they find out? Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view based on our experience and views on the topic. And podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.